I am a 40-year-old feminist, which is why I tell you with just a tinge of embarrassment just how excited I was to see this past summer's smash hit movie, Barbie. Now, I saw the movie about the same time as I read an article in the New York Times about how bartenders were beginning to color code their glassware. This after too many men had returned to the bar to ask that their drinks were transferred into something that was a bit more manly. I found this juxtaposition between this massive female empowerment movie and men's sipping shame to be a bit puzzling. Could we in American culture truly be celebrating the first ever movie directed by a female to gross over $1 billion, while at the same time be bearing witness to men that were terrified of sipping from glassware that was a bit too feminine? I think the answer to this question, to this puzzle, has to do with power. Now, the women in the Barbie movie had unmistakable power, political power, financial power, business leadership power, traditional power, masculine power. Now, I have to say, I drove home from this movie all smiles. Indigo Girls blasting on my radio, feeling good, imagining a Mount Rushmore of feminine faces. But over the course of several days, something began to bother me. It was the Kens. The Kens had no power. And I'm not just talking about the political power or the financial power that we traditionally recognize. I'm talking about the unrecognized power, the savviness, the introspection, the emotional vulnerability, the hallmarks of feminine power. The Kens on these fronts, completely flaccid. So I began to wonder, what if the movie had been made about G.I. Joes instead? Would we be seeing this same male empowerment movement with men dressed in fatigues and dragging their young sons to the theater to watch the movie that would finally free them from the crushing maw of the patriarchy? Something tells me this would not be a Hollywood smash hit, but I do love a challenge. So Dwayne Johnson, when you're ready, give me a call. I'll cast you. In my movie, the G.I. Joes would go out and they'd play war, but no one would get hurt. And afterwards, they'd go out and they'd meet for a beer, or maybe a fancy cocktail, or a Shirley Temple. And no one would worry about the amount of alcohol in their drink, or for heaven's sakes, the glassware that the beverage came in, because honestly, who cares? The men would lay about and play with each other's hair and talk deeply about things that mattered to them. Things like, I just wish every now and then my wife would be the one to go and check on the thing that goes bump in the middle of the night. Because doesn't she realize I'm just as scared as she is? At some point, they'd look at their watches and realize, oh my goodness, it was time to go pick up the kids. They'd be late, so they'd rush off, but not before giving hugs and kisses and telling each other how much they loved one another. The plot twist of this movie, of course, would come when the G.I. Joes realized that this was not how masculinity operated in the real world. In the real world, masculinity was hard-fought, hard-won, and easily lost. In the real world, men were bleeding, fighting, dying, killing one another and themselves for the right to call themselves men and to have value in our society. Unfortunately, unlike the Barbie movie, things don't seem to be getting better for men in the real world. A 2023 report on the state of American men by the international social justice organization Equimundo found that men are in a state of crisis and moving away from the ideals of gender equity. In the report, 41% of men believe that they should always have the final say in every decision made in their heterosexual relationship. 40% of men reported that they trusted pro-violence or anti-feminist voices. Voices like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys. And that number only went up when we talk about our younger generations. 46% of young American men trust President Biden less than they trust Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, the misogynist reality television star, recently indicted on charges of rape, sex trafficking, and creating an organized crime ring with the specific intent of exploiting women. 46%. Where were these men? I looked up from the report in the airport where I'd been sitting, and I began to just count. You, not you, not you, you. Holy smokes, they're everywhere. It became a bit concerning. But before we begin blaming and shaming these men for their beliefs, I think it's really important that we understand how we have always valued men in American culture. From our evolutionary origins, we valued men for the resources that they could provide. Food, shelter, protection. Money, honey. In modern society, a man's value is often the equivalent of his paycheck. There's plenty of science to show that a man who makes more money, well, women find him more attractive, and other men respect him more. So, is it any wonder, in a society that is so digitally connected, with young men spending more and more time scrolling social media and comparing themselves to the Elon Musks, the Bill Gates, the Mr. Beasts of the world, that they're feeling a little worthless and perhaps a bit hopeless? How can they stand out against these millionaires, these billionaires? The answer is they can't. And that frustration and anger, I think, comes offline and into the real world, falling onto the shoulders of women. Women who have been outperforming men in a lot of the ways that they used to show their value. For example, women have been surpassing men in college admissions and degree attainment. A 2019 Harvard Business Review study found that of 17 of the 19 competencies, women outscored men when it comes to leadership qualities. While 2023 was officially dubbed Billion Girl Summer, thanks to Barbie, and of course the world tours of Beyonce and Taylor Swift, bringing in similar dizzying amounts of dosh, I think it's important to recognize just how meteoric this rise has been. Just 10 years before Beyonce was born, a woman couldn't get a credit card in her own name. It wasn't until 1993 that a woman could legally refuse sex with her husband or wear pants on the Senate floor. In Beyonce and my very short lifetimes, we've seen this massive rise in power for women in politics and finance and business leadership. But where has this left men? I think our men are suffering wounds from shattered glass ceilings. Shattered glass, shards of glass that were never meant to be shrapnel, never meant to be violently aimed at men. But if men have always been valued for their position in society, for their status, how can they prove themselves worthy if we haven't cheerleaded them into positions of feminine power the way we've cheerleaded women into positions of masculine power? I think because we have always undervalued and underpaid women's work and power, men are feeling a little lost. Think about women's work: cooking, cleaning, raising of offspring, care of the elderly, tending and befriending of community. These are all essential, important, valuable roles, but not roles that are traditionally defined as powerful. Which is perhaps why, when I was recently able to ask a room full of male CEOs, how many of you would gladly give up your position to become stay-at-home dads or stay-at-home husbands? Immediately, 95% of the hands shot up in the air. I would love to not have the financial responsibility. But their response to my follow-up question was fascinating. So you're telling me you're in the bar, you're hanging with your friends, and somebody comes up and says, hey, what do you do? Would you be proud to respond, I'm a stay-at-home dad? Every hand went down. Nah, couldn't do it. Never mind. Instead of recognizing the power that has never been credited to these positions, instead, these men have to respond with one of the only few emotions we've allowed them to have: shame. And shame, suffered silently, results in violence. The final statistic that I want to share with you tonight from the Equimundo report was the one that perhaps floored me more than any other. In the last 2 weeks, 44% of American men have contemplated suicide. 44%. You. The same men that I had been picking out from the airport to be disgusted with for their opinions, for their hatred of people like me, were just as likely the same men who held hatred for themselves. Our men deserve better. They deserve the feminine power they don't know they need. I think it's time we begin changing the conversation about power, because power, it's more than a dollar. And so is gender equity. Gender equity is more than the 77 cents that a woman makes for every man's dollar. And yes, while that is shameful, so too is the inability of men to show that connectedness, that love, that emotional vulnerability that women have been free to display. Until we begin to cheerlead men into positions of feminine power, as we have cheerleaded women into positions of masculine power, I think we will all continue to suffer wounds from the shards of shattered glass ceilings, staying power hungry, but starving for our own worth. Thank you.